Item 10 is the Central City Revitalization and Housing Committee report, request to terminate memorandum of understanding with ALS Development of North Carolina, LLC, continued from the September 17th City Council meeting presentation. Councilman Todd Pearsall, Chairman.
Thank you, Mayor.
Exhibit 10-1, not exit, exhibit.
Correct. You'll find this in your agenda on Exhibit 10-1. This is a continuation from our September 17th meeting. It was item number 2 on the Central City Revitalization and Housing Committee report. There again on Exhibit 10-1 you can see the notes from that meeting, but the committee voted 3-0 to recommend terminating an existing MOU. The city legal staff had indicated that this could be done by simply giving a 30-day notice to terminate to ALS Development. But then once the committee did vote to terminate that MOU, we received an email from Mr. Jerry Meeks, and he represents ALS Development, asking that we continue this because he could not be at our September 17th meeting. So that is why it's on the agenda tonight. It has been continued. And in regards to that MOU, we have Mr. Joe Grant, who is here, who requested the termination of the MOU, and then we also have Mr. Jerry Meeks, who is here representing the ALS Development. So if we can hear from those gentlemen, Mr. Grant, if you would like to speak first. Yeah. And we can make our decision based on what we hear today.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, council members. When I came to the committee a couple of weeks ago, I expressed my disappointment in having to come and ask you to undo something that I seldom have to do. I represent clients before a wide variety of, that have a wide variety of interests, and I operate on their word. I also expect when I deal with people to ask them to operate on mine. Now the reality is that we were misled by ALS to believe that they had control of the property when they requested that we secure an MOU for them. We spent a considerable amount of time and political capital working that, and this council and the committee were kind enough to do it expeditiously for us. We subsequently found out that ALS does not, to this date, have control of the property, and they have continued to misrepresent that fact. Now, in good faith, I believe that we should withdraw that MOU, because frankly, I don't think you can trust a developer who misrepresents the facts to you like that. I made that case to the committee, and I would like to make it to council. I think that in good faith, you are in a position where you really can't operate on any word from that developer. And professionally, I can't let that continue because I secured it on their word and you voted on mine. So out of respect for that, I respectfully request that the council terminate the MOU effective with 30 days notice, and I'd appreciate you giving that your consideration. I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Any questions of Mr. Grant? Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
And we also have Mr. Jerry Meeks, who represents ALS Development.
Good evening, Mayor and council members. First of all, I have a 4-day-old son at home, so if I have little circles under my eyes.
Let me interrupt you and just say that my notes said that you were being someone representing you is Ryan Francis Meek.
Ryan Francis Meek, born
Did they teach that in law school, the diapers? Okay, go ahead.
Well, thank you for the opportunity to be here today, and thank you also for rescheduling this so that I could be here. I represent ALS Development of North Carolina, which is an affiliate of the EdgeCon Group. And those of you who may not be familiar with the EdgeCon Group, it is a very prominent, large developer and construction company in Ontario, Canada. To give you a sense of their scope, the EdgeCon Group owns, operates, and or has built in Ontario 17 multi-unit residential buildings, 13 hotels, 350 retirement home units, 2,000 units of affordable housing, and they've also developed approximately 500 lots. The president of ALS, which is the actual North Carolina company involved in this project, is Enzo Mizzi, who has spent over 25 years in developing multifamily residential projects and in general contracting. And his specialty has been in the development of affordable housing and assisted living projects in Toronto. He has developed more than 4,000 residential units with a value of more than $600 million. And he's also developed 300,000 square feet of commercial and industrial space with a value of over $100 million. Affiliates of ALS today own and manage close to 600 units in the Charlotte metropolitan area, and they have an additional 270 units planned or under construction. How did we get here today? In March, my client, ALS, hired Quinton Ellie, a consulting company for which Mr. Grant works, to provide development consulting services in connection with the Beaverbrook Apartments project. Under that contract, Quinton Ellie was to be paid compensation for their services totaling almost $1 million, specifically $986,275. And the consulting fees were to be paid to Mr. Grant's company as certain milestones were reached. In July, a dispute arose between ALS and Mr. Grant's company over whether a certain milestone triggered an additional payment. On 7/18, July 18th, the president of Quinton Ellie sent an email to my client threatening that they would tell the city we were dishonest if my client didn't pay them the amount that we disputed. On July 19th, the president of Quinton Ellie informed the owners of the Beaverbrook property that Quinton Ellie would be suing my clients and that they would be asserting a lien against the property. On July 21st, the vice president of Quinton Ellie threatened to contact the city manager in an email to my client and, quote, withdraw the MOU. This is Quinton Ellie saying to my client, we're going to withdraw the MOU, quote unquote, if you do not wire us the disputed funds by 4:30 p.m. that day. And they even indicated in the email that somebody was going to be meeting with the city manager that day, and he would be waiting a call on whether or not the funds had come in before he said that my clients were dishonest. On 8/13, this is 3 weeks later, Joe Grant sends a letter to my clients saying that they'd be happy to continue representing my clients if my clients would pay him the money that was in dispute. Well, needless to say, my client did not pay the money that was in dispute, and as a result, Mr. Grant and Quinton Ellie carried through on their threat. They came to the Central City Revitalization Committee, said that my client had misled them, said that they were dishonest, when in fact we have emails going back all the way to March 13th where it was very clear that my client told Quinton Ellie what the status of the property was. They told Quinton Ellie that there were issues over control of the property that they were trying to resolve. At any rate, my client was not represented at the committee meeting. The committee, my review of the audio indicates that they were about to vote against terminating the MOU, and then Mr. Grant got up a second time and made a second plea as to how dishonest my client was, not revealing, in fact, that this whole dispute emerged over a financial dispute between my client and Quinton Ellie. So where are we now with respect to the project? My client has spent over $175,000 on this project. Since January of this year, as you may know, the note is being held on this property is being held by CIBC, the Canadian Imperial Bank of Commerce. My client has been negotiating with CIBC going all the way back to January. They, in fact, are making the payments on this note. They have made over $125,000 worth of payments on this note going all the way back to the beginning of the year. There's hardly somebody that's not concerned about the property or interested in exercising control over it. In fact, my client has even offered to buy the note from CIBC for $2 million once they have had sufficient time to get a tax credit for this property and once they have entered into a binding MOU with the city. In fact, this summer when the city found violations had occurred at the property, it was my client that paid to fix up those problems. They boarded up the property and they paid $5,000 to do that. There is currently a purchase contract between ALS and the owners of the Beaverbrook Apartments, pursuant to which my clients will purchase the property, and again, they're also negotiating with CIBC over the note, to purchase the note, contingent upon certain events, in particular, their ability to get tax credits. Since my client's relationship was terminated with Quintinelli, they have gone and found a new company to provide them with the services that Quintinelli had previously provided, and they've also selected a new tax credit property manager to assist them in this process. They are very much committed to this, as is evident from the fact that they have put more resources into this than anybody else has, and literally hundreds of thousands of dollars. And they are committed to moving forward and renovating and expanding the Beaverbrook apartment complex per the understanding that you had of the memorandum of understanding. In conclusion, it should be noted the memorandum of understanding was signed between the city and my client on June 18th. It said in there that the memorandum of understanding would be in effect for 2 years. 4 months has elapsed. There's not much time that this MOU has been in place. Second, the MOU says that it can be terminated by either party at any time. So if there ever a point where the city decided, there's another potential suitor for this property, there's another direction that we think we could go in, you could terminate it, and you could go to the new potential developer to try to get this project launched. But in fact, unfortunately, and having said that, there's no harm in keeping the MOU in place if you can terminate it automatically, and I think the committee recognized that. But again, changed its mind once Mr. Grant gave a second appeal. But the effect of terminating this, if you think about how much my client has put into this development, you think about the fact that they have offered to buy a loan for $2 million, that they have a purchase contract in place with the owner of the development, the effect of terminating the MOU would substantially undercut those efforts, would substantially undercut their ability to purchase the note from CIBC or to move forward with the project, and there really would be no tremendous or any upside to the city as far as I can see, other than vindicating Mr. Grant's sense that he should have been paid on a bill that we contend is very much in dispute. I'd be happy to answer any questions you have.
Any questions? Any questions of Attorney Meek from the council?
I think my questions are more towards for our legal counsel.
Okay.
Mr. Mayor, may I make one more comment?
Come to the podium, please.
Thank you, sir. I simply need to address this contract. In my discussion with council and with the committee, I've never raised the contract dispute, I don't believe, in any formal way with ALS. Because frankly, I didn't think that was a variable in this discussion. We have a contract with them. There is a dispute. But to suggest that this is about a contract dispute that we will handle through arbitration is misrepresenting the facts. I don't know whether Mr. George Caloris is here or not. We talked to Mr. Caloris, who is the owner of the property, yesterday. He reiterated that there is no purchase agreement with ALS. Now, frankly, this is the guy who owns the property. Mr. Meek has one impression of that. We talked to the owner yesterday who has another. The fact is that we do not believe that the property is owned by ALS with the purchase agreement in place. And if there is, let them come back and secure an MOU. But we do not believe that is the case now, and we had that conversation with Mr. Caloris, and I regret that you have been brought into what is a contract dispute that will be settled by other means.
Let me ask you, Mr. Meek, just out of curiosity, you said that I'm sort of picking up on the end of this. I'm not on the committee. But I hadn't liked it since day one, and I made it clear I haven't liked it since day one, and really didn't understand it. I don't have a law degree, but I've been doing this 43 years.
I understand.
And,
Neither do I. I don't have a law degree.
well, why, the question just jumps out at me. You just said that you knew that they didn't have a contract now, but why didn't you know it then?
Because we took their word for it.
Just word only. You've never seen a contract.
I'm used to, clients take my word. You all took my word. I operate on my word. I've been a lobbyist for 35 years, and my word is my bond. I don't misrepresent the facts, and if I don't know something, I tell my client or the legislator I'm dealing with, I don't know. I'll get back to you. We operated with these guys. They came in, told us that they owned the property. We only discovered after the fact that they did not own the property. And, in retrospect, I guess I'll have to have everybody provide proof, but we had no reason to believe that they were misrepresenting the facts to us, as we subsequently found out that they were.
Well, just for my information, you used the word that you've been a lobbyist for 35 years. Are you a registered lobbyist?
In South Carolina, yes,
You're registered with the state of South Carolina as a lobbyist?
lobbyist.
Okay, sir. Questions? Go ahead, Chairman, you want to talk?
What, and thank you, Mr. Grant, this is
Thank you.
for our legal counsel. Explain, Councilwoman Craig and Councilman Kimball are on the committee with me, so we've kind of heard a lot of this going on, but maybe if you could just highlight, from the city standpoint, the pros and cons of canceling the MOU or not canceling the MOU.
The MOU is basically an agreement to cooperate in attempting to develop the property.
Turn your mic.
And it's.
Mike.
Okay. I just need to get closer.
Is it on?
Okay. It's an agreement to cooperate in the development of the property, and really it's more of an agreement to agree. It's an agreement to try to work out an agreement to attempt to develop the property. So it really it's not really a binding agreement to do any particular thing except work together. And even that is not completely binding because it can be terminated on 30 days' notice. So from the standpoint of the city, I don't know that there is a particular, just from the agreement itself, an advantage one way or the other than the fact that if it does assist in getting the property developed, if it will help an entity get the property developed, I think that would be the major advantage for the city, in that I think all of us would like to see Beaverbrook developed.
Yes, sir. Mr. Gallagher.
The MOU is between the city of Gastonia and ALS.
Yes,
And that's what this gentleman over here who had the
correct.
four-day
Mr. Meeks.
for you,
Meek.
Mr. Meeks representing. It has nothing to do with the other gentleman, Joe Grant.
It technically has, Mr. Grant is not, as I understand it, a member or a principal in ALS, so it would not have anything to do with Mr. Grant, other than at one point he was retained to negotiate the agreement. That is his relationship with the agreement.
However, the MOU is between us and ALS.
Correct,
And it's up to us to determine whether we're going
completely,
to keep it as is or
right.
diminish the thing for ALS.
Terminate it.
Now, terminating it from ALS, and the reason being, why would we do that?
The committee originally voted to terminate it because Mr. Grant had requested it. There was no, at the committee meeting that, when we were discussing this, ALS had no representation there, and we were not even aware that ALS wanted to keep the MOU in place. Since then, Mr. Meek contacted us, and then we postponed it so we could hear Mr. Meek and Mr. Grant. And I think Melissa probably described it best as Mr. Grant was representing ALS in the initial discussions to get the MOU written, and because he felt like the facts had been misrepresented, he wanted us to go ahead and terminate the MOU. But as you can see, ALS is here tonight to ask us to keep the MOU in place. So it's really just up to the council whether you want to keep it in place or not.
Ms. Craig.
This, if I remember correctly, because I am on the committee, is this MOU was aggressively put together on the recommendation of Mr. Grant. Okay.
Correct.
And it was modeled after some other MOUs that he had with some other municipalities. Is that right?
Yes.
Okay. So basically, and this might be for legal too, is the MOU that we currently have was basically a MOU that Mr. Grant sent to us and revised, and we added to or took out what we felt like we needed to have for the city.
Correct. It was, yes, it was
Okay.
actively negotiated.
Right, okay. that's the legal
Yeah.
terms, okay?
Right.
So, my question in bringing that to forefront, does what is it?
ALS.
Yeah, ALS, is this an MOU that was put together the way the city and Mr. Grant negotiated it? Is it a MOU that ALS can live with currently, okay? Or do we need to modify the MOU and revise it as a certain date? Okay, you see what I'm saying is that we've got one, yes, but it was initiated and it was modeled after what Mr. Grant sent us. So,
My question is, ALS signed this document.
Yeah, and we have not received as far as I know, we have not and obviously Mr. Meek can address this. We have not received a request from ALS to modify the agreement.
So it's in force,
Yes,
Correct.
and in
Right.
reality, Mr. Grant represented ALS to us.
right.
In actuality, they have a dispute amongst themselves. Our agreement is with ALS.
Yeah,
As far as,
we have never had
legally
an
as
agreement with
goes.
Mr. Grant or Mr. Grant's company. The agreement has always been with ALS.
okay, thank you.
Yes, sir, Ed.
To further clarify what Councilwoman Craig mentioned, when we negotiated this MOU, and if in a close reading of the MOU, you see all it does is it says that we will work cooperatively with the developer, and we will work cooperatively with really any developer. There's really no requirement of the city here at all. It is a very loose agreement that just shows that we support the redevelopment of Beaverbrook, really. I think that was the essence of what the committee had. Some of the recent conversations I've had, even with the current owner of the property, they asked me, they said, well, if we come in with another developer, would the city work with them? I said, sure, we will work with whatever development group that is focused on improving the housing quality in Beaverbrook. So whether you have the MOU or don't have the MOU, and we will do that with properties throughout the city. So it's here as a statement that I think that this developer can use, perhaps to their advantage, and that's okay, because we support trying to make that housing better, because if you go out to Beaverbrook, you look at that housing, really something has to be done. So whether it's with ALS or ABC or CBS, it doesn't matter which development group it is, we will work with them. And seriously, we will really work with them, because for us, the city, and because remember, on either side of this project is public housing.
right.
And the public housing folks have moved forward, and they're looking at renovating their buildings. So this all kind of works together. So I don't know if that helps the council in terms of its discussion going forward on this particular item, but that's the background.
Okay.
Could I make a motion that we keep the MOU in place?
Sure.
Sure, you can make a motion.
Make a motion.
To keep the MOU as is, and
Okay, in other words, leave everything just like it is that's a request. Well, that was a request. Okay, this would have to be, Melissa, I guess, as
I mean, technically, the agreement is the agreement, so if you did nothing.
If you did nothing,
that's
The
the-
agreement stays in place, so, I mean, no action leaves the agreement in place.
So you
So
wanna
can
make a
choose-
motion
Or
that-
you can choose to reaffirm it if you would rather have something on the record that you reaffirm the agreement, either way.
So, just one quick question, Mayor, if I
Yes.
could. So your recommendation, in regards to Councilman Gallagher's motion would be that his motion is that the council not take the recommendation of the committee and leave the MOU in place?
That would probably be
or
the.
reaffirm it?
Yeah, or either way. I guess since the committee recommendation was to terminate it, then perhaps the
Reaffirm.
best thing would be to not take, to word it as to not take the committee's recommendation,
Okay, you-
which would leave it in place.
Question for Mr. Meeks. ALS has signed this MOU,
Yes, ma'am.
and it was signed months ago, right?
4 months ago.
4 months ago, all right. Are they still comfortable with everything that's in this MOU?
I have not been asked and am not under any understanding that they have any problem with the current MOU. In fact, they think it's important and helpful to them in trying to get the kind of cooperation they need from CIBC and from others to move this project forward. So I think they're entirely content with the language of the MOU, and we're actively involved in negotiating, of course, even though their representative was certainly not there. Yeah.
One other question. Do you have any kind of a time frame as to when you think ALS will have ownership for this property?
I don't, you know, the purchase contract, and I didn't bring a copy, I got it on my cell phone. Show it up to you. But the purchase contract is contingent upon them being able to get tax credits, and the next deadline for tax credit applications is January now. So I don't know how that fits into the longer time frame, but that at least gives you a short window.
Well, the only reason I ask that is because we've gone through these tax credits with Laurel Ray and some of these others. Evidently, that's a drawn-out process through HUD. Okay, so we could be talking about a next application in January. Then we could be talking about another application following January. But I mean, and I'm not opposed to that, but I know that tax credits can become very, very complicated and very lengthy in a time. And if the public housing is looking at doing something around that Beaver Creek, okay, and then we've got Beaver Creek in here in the middle of it that really needs to be taken care of.
You know, I wish I had a better explanation of that process. I don't. It hasn't been kind of a focus for me so far. I'm happy to gather whatever information I can from my client about what their anticipated timeline is and get in touch with your counsel or with Mr. Munn and give you whatever information I can gather on that.
I mean, and that's really not relevant to the MPO. It's just something that I think that as we look at a timeline again of when something might be completed out there or even started out there, then maybe we put some kind of a revised some kind of statement on the MOU. I don't know. Just throwing things out on the table.
Is the MOU good for 2 years?
It's good for 2 years, but it's terminable at will, basically. You can
For 30
end it
days
at
either.
any time on 30 days' notice.
Mr. Mayor,
Yes, sir.
yeah, my understanding is the MOU will stay in place if we take no action.
Correct.
There's no need for a motion. If we decide in this.
Well, we have to,
terminate.
against the 3-0 vote from the committee.
Right, it's a motion not to accept the committee's recommendation.
Which is basically the same thing, I
Same
guess, in
thing,
my.
if we just take
yeah,
no action.
I second that motion.
What's the motion?
To not take the recommendation of the committee, to leave the MOU in place at this point in time.
There is a motion and a second. Any question? Any discussion?
No, I would just say that in the beginning, when Mr. Grant approached us with this, and certainly Mr. Grant has offered his apologies to the committee and to the council for any misrepresentation he gave, and we certainly accept that apology, Mr. Grant. But despite the intentions of what this was, it has spurred redevelopment plans or remodeling plans with the housing authority on 2 different locations that sorely needed it. The discussions on Beaverbrook itself are still taking place. So in the end, whatever the intentions were, there's some good coming out of this. I certainly appreciate Mr. Meeks and Mr. Grant being here, and we certainly respect and accept your apology, Mr. Grant, for this, but even though the committee did recommend 3-0, I would too be in favor of leaving the MOU in place for now.
Any other discussion? We've heard the motion. Is a second. All in favor? It's unanimous.
I would like to ask Mr. Meeks to please get us that information and get that to the city manager or to the legal department. Thank you.
Okay.
That's all of my report, Mayor.
That's pretty short.